Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight we are talking to Ellie Alexander. I'm Christy from Vintage Books. I should probably say that first. Ellie Alexander is a writer of what we would call cozy mysteries. And the 17th book in one of her series just came out today. So we were all very excited, and people were in the store to pick it up, and they were very excited. So that was really fun. So it's fun to have you here the day of release. And I'm curious if you could start out by maybe just giving a little bit of a synopsis of the series as a whole, and then a little bit about this particular book.
Yeah. Well, it's so fun to come full circle because Vintage Books has been with me from the start. My very first book that came out. You all partnered with me on that event. And so it just feels like so wonderful to get to share release day with you. This series is set in Ashland, Oregon, which is a real place in Southern Oregon. It's home to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and it features a romantic pastry chef, Juliet Montague Capshaw, but please call her Jules, who in the first book in the series returns home to sort of heal a broken heart and help run her family bake shop. And then, of course, she stumbles upon murder like you do. And yeah, like you do. You know, you're making a little souffle and then there's a body, or you're whipping up a beautiful raspberry pistachio tart and there's another body. The body count in Ashland at this point is really high. So that's a cautionary tale.
No, it's kind of like Murder, She Wrote.
Yeah,
you don't want this person in your life for real.
That's right. And this particular book, Catch Me If You Candy, that came out today, there she is. Is, as you can, that's fun. I know, aren't those great? I can't take any credit. That's all the publishing house. It's set at Halloween, and Halloween in Ashland is quite an event. There's a giant community-wide parade where everyone comes in elaborate costumes and sort of does this whole dance all along the streets, and it ends in the plaza with a big party. And it's just the most wholesome, wonderful, spectacular event that I've ever been to in my entire life. And we're not just talking like basic costumes, we're talking elaborate costumes. I think because, the culture is so infused with actors and people attached to the theater, which makes it really fun. And so for this book, there is a parade, much like what happens in real life. And Jules has started out the day by going over to her mom's game group. They're playing Mahjong, and there's a tile that's missing. They're missing a dragon tile, and there's a strange note attached about something that nefarious that might happen to a dragon. And at the end of the parade, something nefarious does happen to someone in a dragon costume, and Jules is on the case.
No, we got to figure it out.
Yes.
Well, this actually brings up something that I was going to ask a little bit later, but I was going to ask you about, how much of what ends up in the novels as Ashland is really part of Ashland. And in this case, I was going to ask about Halloween and how much of what you took was real. So it sounds like the parade is a real thing.
The parade is very
so
real.
I assume that the town gets decorated up too, and all of that as well.
The town gets decorated up, and there's no school on Halloween or the day after. So kids, families, people from all over the Rogue Valley. The parade starts up at the Carnegie Library, and then everybody just sort of meanders their way down Main Street into the plaza. And I mean, it's probably 10,000 people in full costume in this tiny town that it's only 20,000 people. So I think it's so magical, and there's such a community spirit that happens, which is the piece that really resonates.
Well, and I think that's the interesting is that I wonder how many people who read the books, think some of that is like sugar-coated and fabricated, but really most of it isn't actually, and that's really fun to know. Did you pick a passage. I had asked Ellie earlier if she could read a little passage. I hit her up at the last minute. So
no, it's all good. I'm just going to start at the beginning because I feel like with the mystery, that's the way it should be, because we can't give anything away.
That's true.
They say that things are not always what they seem. For a long time, I might not have agreed when it came to my idyllic hometown of Ashland, Oregon, where neighbors helped neighbors and there was a strong sense of community spirit. But my perspective shifted a few days before Halloween this year, when a strange turn of events left me unsettled and made me question whether I was sugarcoating the details of my life in our little corner of the Siskiyou Mountains. The first sign that something wasn't quite right started amid our pre-holiday frenzy. We'd been preparing for the upcoming ghoulish festivities at Tort, my family bake shop. Halloween in Ashland was like stepping on stage at one of the most elaborate productions in the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, also known locally as OSF. Perhaps it was due to the creative and artistic types drawn to the Rogue Valley, or that OSF has an entire warehouse dedicated to costumes, ranging from Greek and Roman times to the Renaissance era. Full military regalia to 1960s beehive headpieces and everything in between. The company rented costumes to theaters of all shapes and sizes, as well as for film and TV. Living in such a mecca meant that All Hallows Eve might be the biggest holiday of the year. Kids and adults alike would spend hours crafting unique and clever costumes for the celebration. This was my favorite part of the Halloween, the parade. Everyone participated. In fact, to call it a parade didn't really do the event justice. It was more like a costume street party, and Tort was right in the mix. We would close the shop to join in the revelry, and then, as soon as the parade spilled into the plaza, we would reopen to serve sweets and coffee and snacks late into the evening. Trick-or-treaters would receive special Halloween goodie bags, a long-time tradition at Tort. Mom and Dad had started the trend back in the bake shop's early days. They had partnered with other family businesses in town to offer a safe space for little witches and pumpkins to traipse from storefront to storefront in search of delicious treats. Every business in the plaza embraced the experience. Next door to Tort, at A Rose by Any Other Name, Janet would hand out bunches of colorful lollipops tied with silky ribbons to resemble flower bouquets. Puck's Pub offered red and white striped bags of cheesy and spicy popcorn. The bookstore gave every youngster a free comic. Vintage would do that, right? For sure.
Something. We'd think of something.
Yeah. There was always a long line at the Green Goblin at the end of the block where servers roamed the sidewalk with trays of their signature garlic fries and lemon aioli for dipping sauce. At Tort, we would be packaging hundreds of Halloween bags filled with our classic sugar cookies designed to resemble candy corn, ghosts, and spiders. And we would also include cider mixes, Frankenstein and eyeball cake pops, and Mummy Munch, our Halloween take on trail mix, mixed with pieces of shortbread, toasted nuts, coconut, pretzels, and black M&Ms. In addition to the treat bags, our pastry cases would be stocked with chocolate cupcakes featuring fluffy buttercream ghosts, tiered cakes with festive holiday sprinkles, and cauldrons filled with decadent custards. Our customers had already put in special orders for parties, but the parade and street fair would bring in thousands of tourists to our little hamlet, and we wanted to be prepared to keep them fed and happy throughout the evening.
I want to go there.
I know, right?
I want my cookie and my little cake pops.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Well, now see, the food has derailed me
It's a problem because as I'm writing this series,
I'm imagining all these things. I'm going, oh yeah, I have questions I was going to ask you.
Let's just talk about food for a minute.
That sounds fine for me. Well, okay, let's talk about.
No,
food.
I'm just kidding. I just mean like that's always my life. Yeah,
like I said, we don't have to go in order. So I did have a food question. So in your books, and I think this is true of all of them, there are recipes in the back, and not just like one. Like there's 6 or 7. Like I was through them today. There's quite a few. How much of that, like what recipes are going to go in the book, is part of your creative process as you're writing it? Like, is that something that helps you like take a break from writing, or that you sit and think about which ones are going to go in more consciously, or is that something you kind of work on at the end, maybe during edits or whatever?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I definitely feel like usually when I'm writing a first draft, I just write a terrible first draft. And so it's whatever's top of mind. I'm trying to think seasonal bakes potentially, so maybe if for a Halloween book, I'm thinking like apple spice, but I will just sort of put a placeholder in that first draft in the manuscript. And then once I have a first draft complete, I let it sit for a couple months. I don't touch it. I come back to it. And then when I'm starting to edit, the food layer is always the final layer. So I'll go through and I'll circle things. And sometimes it's literally like, can I actually bake that? Like Jules, could bake it, but can I bake it?
Yeah.
So it'll be some things like that. And then I will go into my home kitchen here and bake everything or cook, depending on if it's a sweet or savory recipe, probably like 2, sometimes 3 times, especially if I'm testing something out. And I think that process really is such a good brain break, like you're saying, from the like slog of getting a draft done. And it also is so sensory that then I come back and I'm like, oh, the kitchen smelled like nutmeg and cinnamon, and I'm able to add all of those layers back in, which I really love. But the problem is I often then will have to stop myself and be like, no, we still have to get back to the body. Like at the end of the day, this is a mystery.
To get back to the interview.
Because I could spend a lot of time on the food. So.
Well, no, I just think that's really interesting because cooking is such a creative process, but it's such a different creative process. Like when you're writing, it's all in your mind. I mean, you can write it on a piece of paper or write it on the computer, and in a sense that's somewhat physical, but there's not a lot of physicality to it. And I just think there's so much more when you're baking and how that just engages a whole different side of your brain. So
yeah, it's so kinesthetic because you're literally like manipulating dough or and then a lot of times I'll have baking fails in the process, of course, which is kind of great too, because that helps reset me then potentially too.
So throughout this novel, and I don't want to give anything away, so let's tread carefully here. There are changes happening in her life.
Yes.
And you kind of hint at some of that.
Yeah.
It's not a main part of the plot, but it's like something that you mentioned throughout the story. Was that at all inspired by like your changes that have happened to you and your family in the last few years? Or is it more of a story device, maybe hinting of something that might be to come for the character? I'm just curious how much your own experiences kind of seep in to the characters, especially when it's a character that you've lived with for such a long time.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to separate out at this stage. Yeah. I don't think anything that I write, like everything has to have some piece of me or my experiences, and those definitely bleed in. But I do think that the gift of writing a series that is now 17 books in, which I still want to pinch myself, like I just don't believe is that all of the characters, but Jules in particular, she's gone through multiple arcs. When I first started with book 1, when I thought maybe I'd write 3 books, or maybe if I was lucky, I would write 5 books. I kind of had a growth arc for her, and I had a plan. And at that point in time, it was about coming home and finding home and like figuring out who she was as an individual. And then that has evolved and changed over time. And so I really enjoy that piece, probably even more so than the baking, because I know that these are light and cozy, but I want some like emotional resonance and growth for her. So this was planned, and I already know that there will be at least 21 books in the series.
Okay, that was another question that was going to come up later. So there we go.
Just knocking out all your questions. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I have a vision of sort of her arc. And then the other lovely thing about getting to write a long running series is the secondary cast has all have all gotten to have their own little miniature arcs too. So they're growing and changing. And I also think it's reflective of what would really happen in a small business. So that,
people come and go, people have move on to different things, and I'm curious, and for those of you who don't know, Ellie is we still call her a local author in the store, and we still call her ours, even though she doesn't live in Vancouver anymore. But you were in the Ashland area for a long time, and now you've moved south. And I'm curious if that, like the moving process, whether it was going to Ashland or whether it was going further south from Ashland, like, does being in a different location like change any of your writing, even if it's like subtly, like practices or, you know, places where you end up writing or anything like that?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, one of my big fears in moving to Ashland was that I had been writing the series already for like 6 years before we moved to Ashland from Vancouver. And I was concerned that I had built it up in my head in a way that was not going to match reality, because I'd spent chunks of time, you know, I'd come for a week or two here and there, and I felt this, you know, pull and this intense is the wrong word, this strong sense of community, like that passage, right? But I was worried that that was really fictional, and the opposite was true. So I feel like then living in that world that I had created just expanded it all the more. Although it was also a challenge, because I would get up in the morning and like hike through Lithia Park, and literally almost until the last day that we lived there, in my mind, at the end of my walk or hike, I would think, I should just pop into Tort and get a coffee and say hi. And then I'd be like, oh my God, no, that's fiction. And that never went away. Like, just and now being in California, I think anytime you have like a new lens or viewpoint, new vistas, it definitely like sparks something creatively. I don't know what it is yet, but I can feel it.
I love that, because I think that is a lot of the creative process is the parts you don't even see. You know, I talk to people about, I think we're also driven to produce. I think that particularly in our culture, it's very production oriented, and so much of writing isn't that. You know, so much of writing is, I thought about it. And you feel really guilty about that, but then if you don't do that, you can't produce anything at the end of it. And sometimes I feel like there's even a step before that you're not even fully aware of, that just kind of like is nurturing or kind of incubating stuff that you're like, something's up and I don't know what it's going to be yet. And I think that that's an interesting part of the creative process.
I love that part. And it is kind of a mystery, because you don't know where it's going to lead you.
Like, what's it going to do?
And I know, like right now I'm going to write something new that's not going to be, it's definitely something that's not a mystery, but I just feel it. I don't know what it is. Like,
I've been kind of in that spot in my own creative work too. Because I have sort of backed off from the work for hire that I was doing, mostly because I started working at the bookstore, and it was like, I really love this, and it's taking a lot of my creative energy, and I loved that. I love what I'm doing. And so I kind of, but now it's like in the back of my mind, there's something cooking, but I don't really know what it's going to be yet, but we'll see.
And then you just give it space, right? Like you just let it marinate and do its thing. And
you have to trust that it's going to marinate into something eventually, because I think there's that part of, well, what if it never goes anywhere? So let's see. I am going to reorient myself, because we've just talked about so much stuff already. Oh, I was going to ask, and I think we might have talked about this last time we talked, but maybe in a little bit different way, is when you're dealing with this, specifically with a long running series, where you've covered a lot of ground, the character has had a lot of growth, but beyond that, there's just been, you've written a lot of plots, a lot of it you've done already. What does the creative process of a new novel look like for you, specifically in the Bake Shop mystery series? Because does it start with a clever title, because that's a big part of the story, or does it start with they have this big parade at Halloween, I'm going to write a Halloween mystery? What does that look like when you're sitting down to think about, well, what's number 19 going to be, or 20, or...
Yeah. Because I feel like obviously the mystery has to drive the plot, right? We need suspects, we need red herrings, exactly. It's that part is the formula. But because I have such a heart connection to Jules as a character, I think for me, what drives every story is where she's going in her world. And so typically what happens is, as I'm wrapping up, so right now I'm looking at my desk and I'm editing book 19 right now. And as I'm I know
the one that came out, 18 is coming out in February. So
that's done. Yeah. Okay. So I'm in draft form of 19 right now, but I'm working my way through edits. And usually as I'm wrapping up this book, I'm already starting to think there are a couple secondary characters, Sterling and Steph, who've been long running Bake Shop employees. And I know that book 20 is going to really focus on them and their growth and where they're going. So that's always where I start. And it just kind of happens naturally, because I think there's so much to work with in terms of the cast. Sometimes it'll be seasonal. I try to I'm following the wheel of the year in terms of okay, next we're going into fall or whatever season we're going into. So there's that piece. The title is Last.
Interesting.
I never have a title.
I love that, because
right now this is book 19. That's what it says.
Yeah. And it's always just it's always such a clever play on words. So I didn't know whether that had to come earlier, or else you would back yourself into a corner and not be able to think.
Right. What are we doing? Oh no. I said it was mocha. Yeah. No, in fact, I would say maybe 10% of the time a working title. Sometimes I'll have a working title. This one is literally just book 19, ends up being the final title. Almost never.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. I love that.
Yeah.
Because I think it's so interesting to talk to each writer and talk about how their writing process works. And I'm guessing, and I guess this is a question, does the writing process look different for the different series or books that you've worked on? Does it end up being a little bit different, say for a brand new book, or maybe Lost Coast Literary or something, where you haven't lived with those characters for as long as you've lived with Jules and all the cast at Tort? Does that end up being a different process because it's newer?
Yeah, in fact, I'm working on a new series that I'm doing with a UK publisher, and it's totally different energy, building out this world and coming up with the cast of characters that's palpable, exciting energy. And I had forgotten how much I love that. That's also a lot of usually I'm just here in my office typing away and chatting with fictional characters in my head who I think are real. But that's a lot of being out in the world, observing, taking my notebook and driving the California coast or sitting at a coffee shop observing. So that's a lot of observing energy and then world building. Working on book 19, it's just muscle memory. I don't have to think about what a character is going to say or how to describe something. It's so fluid and easy. So in some ways, starting something new, even though it's more challenging, kind of ignites a different part of my creative energy.
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, I would imagine that it's in a lot of ways either writing or acting on a long-running TV show, where you just kind of know what the characters are going to say in any given situation. You don't really have to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But then the challenge becomes, how do you keep it fresh? How does it feel authentic?
Yeah.
For me, I still love these characters. It feels like coming home every time. I think if I got to a point where it felt like, this is just routine, or I didn't have a vision of where their arcs, like ways that they might grow, then it's probably time to be done.
Yeah. 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 Well, it's so funny. I have Catch Me If You Candy goes all in on the Halloween theme. Where did you get some of your ideas? And so we talked about that earlier because of the parade being the real deal. And so since it is the real deal, like, can you think of some of the more sort of either really extravagant or really outlandish costumes that you remember seeing people wear?
I mean, it's just phenomenal. So for me, my husband made me the cup of holiday fear. I had a holiday mug on my Christmas book a few years ago.
Yeah.
And so he made me a full cup from the mug with the skull on the front, and I'm walking down. Entire families with themes, giant stilt walkers that look like Death Eaters from Harry Potter. It's hard to even like do justice to the amount of creativity that you see, because people, they really they pour their hearts and souls. But then sometimes I almost feel like I'm cheating because I don't have to stretch my imagination that much, because I'm just like, this is gold. Like, okay. I'll take that.
No, I was actually thinking that, so was that true in the other books too? Like, you talk about a lot of different things that happen in Ashland. Was it mostly derived from things that actually really do happen there, or did you make some of them up? And
almost everything that's happened plot-wise has been inspired by real places, real events. I wrote a book, Live and Let Pie, a few years ago that these young girls are diving down beneath Immigrant Lake, and there's a city that's buried under there because they flooded that land. There was originally a town, Klamath Junction, and in real life, they find a gumball machine and a gas station, but in the book, they find a skull and an old body in a cold case. So like that was in the newspaper, this whole thing, because when the lake levels were low, you could see the gas station, that sort of thing. The only thing that I try not to do is if there's anything that has kind of a negative connotation, like she has a long running feud with this owner, Richard Lord of the Mary Windsor Hotel across the plaza. That there's not really a hotel there. That's City Hall. That doesn't exist. I don't want to put negative energy into the world. I'm writing about a real place.
Real people. That would be hard, because you wouldn't want to imply that anything was bad or whatever.
No.
So is the same true? So for those of you who don't know, Ellie also has another series, that the Sloane Krause mysteries that are set in Leavenworth. And I know you've spent some time there too, but is the same thing true of like events that happen in those books? I know Leavenworth has lots of cool events. So I would imagine that at least some of them you put in that are real.
Yeah. And then it's a strange, like, this is kind of the theme of Lost Coast, the standalone book that I wrote, like life imitating art. So Leavenworth has all kinds of festivals, and I was up visiting for Oktoberfest many years ago, and I wrote a book, The Pint of No Return, which is the second book in the series about Oktoberfest. And while we were there, I was just taking copious notes. I was observing everything, and it's a great, gorgeous festival, but it does attract then a side crowd. For the most part, it's family friendly, but there's a small percentage of maybe fraternity guys who come over from UW and just want to like drink beer for the weekend. Get
right?
Shocking. I know. And so I was watching some interactions and thinking like, what would be interesting is if, let's say, someone on city council or the mayor decided to make Leavenworth dry and shut Oktoberfest down. From a mystery writing perspective, I was thinking this is great because it gives me so many potential suspects. There are so many people who are going to want to kill him because this is the livelihood of this small mountainous town, right? Well, fast forward to like 5-6 years later, I get an email from a reader who lives in Leavenworth, and she's like, "What have you done?" Like, what do you mean? What have I done? A new city council member got elected, and they canceled Oktoberfest and moved it to Wenatchee. So I'm like,
oh no,
did I manifest this? I didn't. What have I done? Yeah.
That is very odd. But, I thought you were going to say that somebody was murdered during Oktoberfest.
Nope. I don't know. That city council. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So we talked a little bit about the fact that you're going to, you're thinking that the series might be 21-ish books and stuff. And I noticed that the Sloane Krause, you have a couple on Kindle.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a series that you're going to keep going with, or is that one pretty much wound down?
My goal is so I did a 6th full-length book earlier this year, and then I've written 2 novellas, 2 short stories that are about 100 pages each. My goal is to write a 3rd, and then I'm going to publish a collection of those in print as well.
Oh, gotcha. Well, I have a reader who will be very happy to hear that.
Oh, good.
Do you know if those Kindle, I don't like to read on Kindle. I want to know if they're going to come out in print.
They are. Tell the reader they're coming. You really can't do a print version of 100 pages. That's so lame.
Yeah. I mean, you can, but yeah, it does have different ramifications for cost and all of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So you said, you've got this series that's got a few more left. And by the way, the next book comes out in February, but first you gotta read this one, everybody. So
yeah,
go get this one first. And then the Sloane Krause, it sounds like it's gonna tie up fairly soon. The Lost Coast Literary, was that gonna be a standalone, or is that something you think you might do more of?
Yeah, I wrote it initially as a standalone, but I don't know. I've sketched out an idea for what could happen for a sequel. But kind of like what we were talking about earlier, my energy isn't drawn there yet. So I'm just, I'm giving it time and space to see.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's hard for people because, other writer friends who do fiction, I've also talked to you about how the whole idea of, you want people to be excited and want, more, but a lot of times in your mind, like that piece is done and you're on to something else, or as particularly because I think in the publishing process, like you've written the book a long time ago,
right?
You've written it, then they all went all through edits and stuff. So by the time it comes out, like you've probably been onto something new for 6, 8, 9 months, even a year. and the reader, of course, is just getting it and just excited about it. But I think it's hard for people to well, why don't you just, go write another one?
Right, I know.
And I think it's hard to explain that sort of creative energy that has to be there to invest in a project without sounding very pretentious.
I know, right? Yeah.
Because it's just like, but it is. I mean, there is something that you have to have that motivation and that creative energy. It's not, because if you don't, it just makes this such a slog to get through.
Exactly.
So yeah.
And sometimes it's just time too. I have another novel that I wrote 2 or 3 years ago that's just been sitting in a closet. And I know at some point in time, I like it's a full first draft and I have a vision of where I want it to go, but I'm just not called to be there yet. So I have to trust, like at some point I'll be like, all right, now I'm ready.
Now it's time. Yeah. No, and I have some of my favorite writers, talking their acknowledgements about, this is an idea I had 10 years ago, and I just sort of fiddled with it, but and then finally the story came to me and I finished it. But you can force it. Sometimes you have to if you're on a deadline.
Sure.
But it's miserable. Yeah. And I think, and then nobody wants to really, I mean, it doesn't come out the same way. I think there's something to it that you can kind of tell if somebody was not having a good time when they were writing.
It's going to come through in the writing. So, absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like for me, I have such a have such a natural rhythm with writing, like the bake shop. And I know how that flows. I know how to embody that space. And then when I have time to work on some other side projects, I just sort of follow where that goes, but I don't want those to feel forced.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it scary to jump into something new when you've been doing something that feels familiar for such a long time?
Yeah, for sure. But in a good way, like I think you also have to push yourself and because like we were saying earlier too, mysteries are so narrow in terms of the scope of what you can do within the pages, right? Not with characters in the world, but like the actual guts of a mystery. You need so many things.
They all have to have somewhat similar pieces and
right.
Otherwise, as readers, we go, wait, what the heck's going on?
What? Yeah, where are we going?
I missed my signpost somewhere there.
Yeah, exactly. So I do so much plotting ahead of time. Like I know who the murderer is. It might change, but like I have a vision. And so then to write something where I'm just sort of going in totally open-ended with no clear path or direction, it's much more like a meander, was so different, but also kind of refreshing because I'm like, oh wait, I don't know what's happening next.
Yeah. So what genre is, can you say yet? Are you ready to say yet? It's okay if you're not. The newer series that you think you might be doing.
Oh, the newer series, that's a new mystery series. That's happening for sure. Yeah. That is going to be published. The first one of those will come out April of next year.
Okay. But I thought you said that you had another project you were thinking of.
Yes. So that's my
standalone, or I can't remember.
Women's fiction. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
And Lost Coast Literary was an interesting one because it wasn't a mystery exactly, but there was some sort of mysterious elements. There wasn't like a body or anything like that, but there was definitely kind of a, trying to figure stuff out. So it was an interesting mix of like, fiction, women's, or not women. I hate that term.
I do too.
Genre fiction. I don't know what, we need a better term because
we need a better term. Commercial fiction is one of the things I've heard. But it also makes me mad because we don't have men's fiction.
Yeah.
It's just fiction.
Yeah. No, as I find myself falling into using it, and as soon as I start to say it, it's like, no, because it's incredibly gendered, and books don't have gender any more than colors do and anything else.
Exactly.
But I think it also, like we've had men come in and buy the books from that fiction section, and like you can tell that they kind of feel a little weird about it, and it's like, you can read whatever you want, don't you feel bad about that. So but it is interesting how we've decided that apparently only girls read non-serious books.
Not true at all. Yeah.
Like whatever. Give me that. But so it'll be like a fiction, but not it's interesting how to parse that, because it's some of those are I would say are probably contemporary fiction, and would be
contemporary fiction's good. It's a story that's going to follow 4 women who are all at different stages in their lives, and they're all on parallel and divergent paths, and
interesting,
all of their stories kind of come together. But that's as much as I know because it's been sitting in a closet.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Does it change, just being in California, like give you some new inspirations that maybe you didn't have, like say in Vancouver, and like moving to different places, does that give you a fresh backdrop, I guess, for some stories?
Yeah, I think so. I had never anticipated moving. I had grown up in Vancouver and been there basically my entire adult life. And so now within the last 10 years, I've moved twice. My husband's joking. He's like, we're just going to work our way down to Mexico, but no. Maybe. I think so, for sure. And it goes back to that idea of my writing process itself doesn't change because it's muscle memory. So like, I know that I'm going to sit down and I'm going to draft, and But I do think it's more just the visual aspects of how things are different, or even like we're all on the West Coast, but there are subtle cultural differences.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
The food is different. And
yes. Well, even on the beach, like the beach is different. The animals that are there, the sea life and all of that is different. I remember going to Northern California coast and thinking, you're not that far away from the Oregon coast.
Right.
You're a couple hundred miles, and yet the ecosystem, like the animals and everything, are completely different, and you're totally just like, different. Where are this and that and the other thing, and what are these little guys? And
exactly.
So another thing you do is writing coaching, which I was poking around the website as I was thinking about what we could talk about, and one of the things that I was thinking about is like, obviously in your coaching you take everything you've learned from writing all the books that you've written to share with other people. But I'm curious, I'd have to shut the window here. Neighbor dog is chatting. I'm curious if that act of teaching and coaching has then come back around to influence how you do writing for you.
That's a good question. I don't think in a direct way, but I will say, like, nothing brings me more joy than coaching and teaching. I like, even just thinking about it, like, I start to get giddy. I had a coaching session with a client yesterday, and just watching them like piece it all together. I think there's such interesting creative energy when you're working together with someone. And getting to kind of be in that mentor role. I would say probably the process of helping someone build a world in their novel is filling me up with my own sense of like, oh, that's right, I forgot that when I'm in this world of Jules, I'm doing that too. So maybe it's more reinforcing.
I was just curious, because I think sometimes when you have to teach something, you honestly, I think reinforcing is a good way to say it. It's like you're not relearning it per se, but you're like, oh, okay,
that's right. That's what I do.
I'm saying these things and they're actually true.
And the course that I put together, that is like a self-paced course for somebody who wants to write a mystery, that was a 1.5 year long process. And I literally went through and was like, okay, what do I do for this stage? What do I, so that was really like a full dissertation on like, how do you write a mystery? What do I do? So that was great. But one-on-one coaching is, that's kind of a different process, just in terms of sharing that.
And I'm assuming at that point, you're just kind of meeting people where they are as far as what piece they need.
Right. And that's fun too, because, sometimes a new writer needs help just brainstorming and like coming up with characters and how do you develop a character. And then some writers have fully fleshed out plots and need help with the structure and building red herring. So it's kind of the gamut then too.
Yeah, that's fun. That's very fun. I think it's energizing too, because it's a different creative process than doing it like yourself. And so
and then watching a number of my students have landed agents and book deals and published themselves, so that just feels like, oh my god, we need more books in the world. So that just makes my heart happy.
I think that's one of the like secret gems of writing and publishing, is that, I mean, maybe this isn't true for everyone. I think it's always been true for me. Like, I get just as excited if somebody I know has a book come out.
Yes, right.
Then I'm honestly sometimes more excited, because I think for me, when my book comes out, it's just this weird sort of sometimes it can be a little bit weird and disjointed and kind of like, oh yeah, I was working on that like 2 years ago. And,
right. Here it is.
It's out. And because your head is so in the now and where you're writing now, and you're like, I'm happy about this, but it's almost kind of a weird, like, how do I be happy about this when I'm like focused on this other thing?
But
when somebody else's book comes out, it's just like, I'm so excited.
Totally. Yeah.
So,
and we know what the inordinate amount of work that it has taken to get to that point too. So I think you can really appreciate like, you did that. Yeah.
And I can imagine like if you've mentored the person too, that's even more exciting because it's like one of your kids has their kid.
I know, totally. Yeah. It's like the book babies. I mean, those writers, they're still like, it's not, they're doing all the work themselves, but it does feel like I have more of a personal connection for sure.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. I'm excited that you could do it. I'm excited about the new book. How can people, if they're interested, I mean, we've got, just so you all know, I mean, I think we've got all of the Bake Shop mysteries and all of the Sloane Krause mysteries and Lost Coast Literary all at the store. Both new and used. We've got some in the used section as well. So if you're looking for Ellie's books, most of the time we don't carry like the entire series of something, but in Ellie's case, we have the entire series because people keep coming and asking for it. So, so yeah, if you're looking for that, you can come to the store or call the store or go online and grab those books. But Ellie, how can they, if they're writing, how can they get a hold of you as far as the mystery course that you were talking about or the coaching or anything like that if they're interested?
Yeah. And I also sent signed book plates up.
Oh yes. We got cute little pumpkins.
Yeah, cute little Halloween pumpkins. So so be sure to shop local. They can find me at elliealexander.co. All of my info is on my website and it's co, not com.
Okay. I just think of it as company.
That's right. It's my empire. Yeah.
That is so great. And so I'm just going to let you know quickly, next Tuesday, we're going to be talking to Waka T. Brown about her middle grade novel. And I'm trying to think if something else is coming up. We've announced book club titles for next month. And I'm trying to think. I did not write this down, so you're catching me. I bet. I know that for our sci-fi fantasy book club, we're reading Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin.
That's my favorite Ursula Le Guin title ever.
And I think that Debbie and her mystery group are reading a book called, I think it's called Bored to Death.
Oh yeah, CJ Connor.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like a board game.
It's a debut. Yes.
Really fun.
So fun. So they are coming to the Ashland Mystery Fest.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah. No, this looks really cool. I like board games. So I saw they were going to read that. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll have to join this time.
It's great.
Take a look at the website or social media. Sorry. I think it'll be more updated on social media, but because the sci-fi group is still meeting the second Saturday of the month, but the mystery group is meeting, I think it's like the third Friday because of some scheduling conflicts this time. So check that out and come and hang out with us and read books. Go check out Ellie's books. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you, Ellie.